Welcome to Annals of the Irish. England had regulated prices of corn since the 17th century, but corn laws originated in 1815 by the Conservative Prime Minister Liverpool. At the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Parliament had passed legislation stating no foreign corn could be imported into Britain until domestic corn cost 80 per quarter. The high price of food increased, and it depressed the domestic market for manufactured goods because people spent the bulk of their earnings on food rather than commodities. The Corn Laws caused great distress among the working class in the towns. Corn riots eventually happened in 1816 in Leoport, Brandon, Feltwell, and Hockwald. People were unable to grow their own food and had to pay the high prices in order to stay alive. Since the vast majority of voters and members of parliament were landowners, the government was unwilling to reconsider the new legislation in order to help the economy. The poor or the manufacturers who laid off workers in times of restricted trade. In 1828, the Corn Laws were revised by the Duke of Wellington's government. A sliding scale was introduced which allowed foreign corn to be imported duty-free when the domestic price rose to 73 per quarter. The more the price of domestic grain fell, the higher the duty became. The sliding scale still did not really help the poor or the manufacturers. The 1832 Reform Act gave the vote to a sizable portion of the industrial middle classes. This piece of legislation meant that the manufacturers now have more importance in the governance of Britain, and some notice had to be taken of their opinions. The Whig government seemed to have little idea about economics, although in 1840 it set up a parliamentary select committee to investigate the actions of import duties. Robert Peel asked, on 18 May 1841, can there be a more lamentable picture than that of a Chancellor of the Exchequer seated on an empty chest by the pool of bottomless deficiency, fishing for a budget? The Whig governments of 1830-34 and 1835-41 were challenged by many different groups of agitators, including the Anti-Poor Law movement, the 10-Hour movement, and the Anti-Corn Law League. The Anti-Corn Law Association was set up in London in 1836, but had little success there. It was reformed in 1838 in Manchester by manufacturer Richard Cobden and author John Bright. Cobden worked hard to influence Conservative Prime Minister Robert Peel in 1841 that the Corn Laws should be repealed, and Cobden became an MP himself in 1841. The League was one of the largest movements at the time and benefited from a lot of funding and well thought out campaigning. The Economist was founded in 1843 with the purpose of promoting and gathering support for the repeal of the Corn Laws. These attempts were difficult for the government to ignore for too long, and in 1839 the League was renamed the Anti-Corn Law League, ACLL for short. The members of this movement were mainly middle-class manufacturers, merchants, bankers, and traders. They wanted the Corn Laws to be repealed so they could sell more goods both in Britain and overseas. The keystone of the protectionist system was the Corn Laws. Once they were repealed, the ACLL thought that free trade would follow. The ACLL headed a nationwide campaign for the repeal of the Corn Laws. which ended in success in 1846 when the then Prime Minister Robert Peel repealed the legislation. But how did it affect Ireland? A lot of the other produce in Ireland was priced too high for the majority of the population of the poor and poor tenant farmers to feed themselves. So they were forced to rely on the potato. Slán Inis.